A long, long time ago, before Harriet Tubman, which feels like ancient history, a baby was born to an Israelite woman. Pharaoh was afraid that the population of the Israelites was growing too fast and too large, so he was having all male babies killed. So this poor mama, who doesn't know what to do to keep her son alive, puts her baby boy in a basket and floats him in the river. As the story goes, Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and decided to raise him in the palace. As a young adult, Moses saw the enslaved Israelites being beaten by slave masters. And one day his anger took over and he killed a slave master and buried him in the sand. When he realized that people knew what he did and that Pharaoh was looking for him to kill him, he ran, fearful for his life, into the desert and went into hiding.
Harriet was born into slavery in 1949. As she grew, she saw people beaten, sold, and treated worse than the dogs on the plantations. When she found out that she was going to be sold away from her family, she couldn't stay any longer. She ran, fearing for her life, into the woods, heading north, following the stars and the river, and made it to freedom in Philadelphia. When I found I had crossed the line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such glory over everything. The sun came out like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven.
One day, Moses is tending the sheep in the desert of Midian, and he sees a bush burst into flames, but the bush is not being consumed by the fire. So Moses is curious, and he approaches the bush. He stops suddenly when a voice says, "Take off your sandals, this is holy ground." The voice continues, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come to rescue them, to take them out of slavery and lead them into freedom in a land flowing with milk and honey. To save them, says God, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring the Israelites out of Egypt."
In her dreams and visions, God tells Harriet that the cries of her brothers and sisters suffering in slavery have been heard. Her broken heart for her family still in slavery wouldn't stop aching. She knew God was calling her to help free her people. Harriet's friends and fellow abolitionists witnessed to her belief that the source of her strength came from her faith in God as a deliverer and protector of the weak.
Moses argues with God, trying to avoid this call on his life, but as many of us know, God wins in these arguments, and he heads back to Egypt. Think about this. Moses is returning to the place where he is a wanted man, not just going back, but actually going back to approach Pharaoh and asking for the release of his people. Let my people go. It takes courage. Perhaps this is the true meaning of the fear of God, to be in such awe of the power of God that you respond when you are called. You can trust God enough to respond even if it's hard. God says to Moses, "I will be with you."
Harriet feels the call to go back and save her family, and then to save as many of her black brothers and sisters as she can. Her bravery and passion empower her, and her fear keeps her on her toes, keeps her cautious, keeps her moving. Her visions from God direct her, guide her, lead her. God is with her. Harriet would listen carefully to the voice of God as she led slaves north, and she would only go where she felt God was leading her.
Moses, after many plagues on Egypt, convinces Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. Moses leads his people through the sea and into freedom. Eventually, the people are able to enter the promised land.
Between 1850 and 1860, Harriet returned south many times and brought many slaves to freedom. Some of them walked through the water and the heat, but eventually they arrived in a place of freedom. She was very proud of the fact that she never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad. Her work for slaves in the South earned her the nickname Moses.
Thank you, Susanna. Harriet Tubman was not the only brave and courageous person. Many, many people played a role in the success of the Underground Railroad. Maybe some of you know this. Farmington and Farmington Hills area has a strong local connection with the railroad. Farmington was founded by a Quaker, Arthur Power Road, who was from Farmington, New York. The Friends at the Meeting House was built in 1832, and the Quaker influence was strong in this area. One of the essential beliefs of the Quakers is universal equality. All God's children are equal and valued, which runs contradictory to slavery. Quakers across Michigan united in the abolition of slavery in the mid-1800s. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850, allowing for the capture of runaway slaves in free states to be returned south to their owners. This required that the Underground Railroad go all the way to Canada, which welcomed escaped slaves with open arms. There is a great scene in the movie. Her friends and fellow abolitionists are trying to tell Harriet that it's just too far and too dangerous for her to keep getting the slaves and bringing them up on the Underground Railroad. And her response is this: I'm not going to quit just because it's far. Maybe, she says to her friends, you've forgotten the horrors of slavery, but I haven't forgotten, and I will keep going until this beast called slavery is ended. So Michigan became a route on the railroad, and some people came through the Farmington area. Michigan Quakers quickly mobilized and joined the cause. The Philbrick Tavern, just down 11 Mile at Power Road, now a private home, was part of the railroad, along with the First Baptist Church and several area farmhouses. From Farmington, escaped slaves would be helped to Detroit, where they would cross the river to Windsor. You may have seen that statue there at Hart Plaza, right on the river, representing the folks who crossed the river there. It's unknown how many people passed through Farmington on their way to freedom, but one couple, Aaron and Ellen Wilson, did. They came through the area, stayed at the Philbrick Tavern, where Ellen Wilson made friends with Mrs. Esch, who lived there. The Wilsons stayed in Canada and became Canadian citizens, but after the Civil War, when they were free and could live without fear in Michigan, they returned to Farmington because the people were friendly here. After moving around a bit, they were able to build a home on 5 acres just down 11 Mile Road before you get to Orchard Lake. There's a historical marker there titled Freedom Acres. Some of you who have been around Farmington for a while might remember Wilmington Holm, better known as Pete the TV Man. He died in 1988. He was the great-grandson of Aaron and Ellen Wilson, and it seems in my research that the family still owns the property down the road. Now, obviously, Narden Park wasn't in this location. In fact, Narden Park United Methodist Church hadn't even been formed yet. But let's imagine for a moment that we are back in the 1850s. We've heard about escaped slaves being ushered through the area. In fact, just the other evening, you were at Philbrick Tavern having a Coke. And you thought you saw a few black people slipping quickly past the window and into the darkness. You've heard that they were harboring fugitives. And here we are, 1.3 miles from the tavern. What would we do? Would we stand up and do something? Would we open our doors and allow escaped slaves to hide in the tunnels that run underneath this sanctuary? Or would we be worried about what it might cost us? Prison and huge fines were the punishments for helping slaves escape. Would it be more important to follow the law, or more important to do what is right? Do good, show love. It's not as easy as it sounds. Would we be willing to take the risk? When we think about what we might have done 170 years ago, with all the hindsight that we now have, it might be easy to say boldly, we would have helped. We would have done the right thing. Let's think about where we are now, in our current time and place. What is holding us back? from being loud, really loud and active voices of justice now. I am so proud that this congregation has taken a stand to be fully inclusive in our welcome. But now we have the even more difficult challenge to live up to the words that are printed on the front of our bulletin. But injustice is still happening in our world every day and everywhere. You and I, we may disagree on immigration laws and policies, but we can agree that people are people and should be treated with respect and kindness. You know, everyone is looking for the same thing, a safe place to raise your family, a place to work, and be able to provide for the people they love. How can we make a difference in the lives of refugees and undocumented citizens? Racism is still alive and well in our world. Blaming people for that will get us nowhere. I don't know whose fault it is, but we should stand up for it, against it. Reverend Smalls from Hope United Methodist Church in Southfield lives in a gated community, and he says it's not a big deal. It really just has a gate around it. One night, a few weeks ago, he drove past the gate toward his home. A police car pulled him over. The officer searched his car with one of those big flashlights, walked around, looked in all the windows, and then said to Reverend Smalls, "I pulled you over because you look suspicious." My question is, how does one look suspicious in his car getting ready to pull into his garage, besides the color of his skin? African Americans own only 1/10 of the wealth of white Americans. If you're black, you are much more likely to be convicted of a crime to serve a prison sentence compared to the white person who committed the same crime. Racism is still a problem. Slavery still exists. It's no longer legal, but that doesn't stop it. There is a reason we serve and sell free trade coffee and chocolate here. 45.8 million people, 5.5 million of them are children, live in slavery all over the world. The U.S. is included in that statistic. $150 billion of illegal profits are made every year, making slavery the second largest international crime. Human trafficking is the way that most people end up in slavery. Human trafficking is defined as the act of recruiting or transferring a person by means of coercion, abduction, or deception for the purposes of exploitation, usually forced labor. If you'd like to know more about slavery today, I encourage you to visit freedomunited.org. And there's another good movie out right now, and I wasn't going to mix movies, but they come together, that also deals with racism, Just Mercy. Don't worry, I have no spoilers here because I really want you all to go see the movie. Just Mercy is a true story about the work of a young lawyer, Brian Stevenson, who wrote a book by the same title. Brian and I were in the same small Christian college in Pennsylvania. By small, I mean 400 students on campus, so we all knew of each other. Just Mercy is about Stevenson's work with an innocent man on death row. Brian's work for justice in the criminal system has saved many people and brought attention to the work of racism in the court systems. This isn't in the movie, but Brian Stevenson believes that hope is the way to keep working on the injustices in our world. He says, "I believe that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists." Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. Everyone can make a difference. I am persuaded that any one of us can make a difference. Any of us can stand up when other people are sitting. Any of us can speak when other people are silent. Any of us can do transforming work. We need hopeful people to be witnesses of why justice matters, why it's important to be fair, why it's important that there be equality. And it's important to recognize that you might need to be the person to stand up and speak. Friends, this is hard work. It's not easy. It requires knowledge, research to understand how we can make a difference and where we can make a difference. It requires bravery, letting people into your world, people you might not understand, that might think very differently than you do. It requires sacrifice of time and resources We may be called to share our home or our church building with someone in need of shelter. We may be called to protest laws that are unjust. We may be called to give of ourselves in new ways. Working for injustice may be uncomfortable, but Christianity never claimed to be easy. When Jesus says, "Take up my cross and follow me," Christ is calling us to a life that is selfless, giving of our little to those who have less, risking our comfort and safety to do what is right in the eyes of God, offering hope so that justice may prevail. Hope is your superpower, says Brian Stevenson. Don't let anybody or anything make you hopeless. Hope will get you to stand up and speak when people tell you to sit down and be quiet. That's the nice way to say it. Amen.